What's up, everybody, and welcome back to First Round Frenzy. Matt Laguza, Cole Noble here, and we are less than 24 hours away from the start of the NFL Combine here at the time of recording. Cole, it's an exciting week for all of us. This is where a lot of these top prospects kind of separate themselves from each other especially on an athletic standpoint, but also through interviews that happen during this week. So it's a big week for a lot of these prospects, especially in some of these deep position groups that we've been talking about over the past few weeks. So, Cole, we're going to go through a few topics here. How are we doing? And what do you think of, the entire draft process, the entire draft combine process as a whole coming up?
Yeah, I'm doing good. The combine's always fun. I mean, it's not only good for the prospects to test athletically, also do the interviews and get those boxes checked off as well. But what excites me every year is getting everyone in the league, whether it's scouts, whether it's general managers, whether it's sometimes players and coaches that are already in the league, but everyone in the same building and the amount of intel that comes out of this event because that goes into free agency, which then sets the table for the draft, and then you start going back and looking at the prospects again. So we're going to get a lot of interesting dirt and detail out of the combine this year. That's going to really, open things up for the rest of the draft. And we get to see the prospects. It's always cool to see which ones test and put up absolute insane showings. Sometimes never get heard of again. So we'll see what happens. I remember all the hype around Zach Kuntz whenever
Oh yeah.
he had like a perfect 10 RAS score at the combine, and
And
you
where
haven't
is
heard
he
from him since with the Jets.
Well,
Yeah,
this is
no,
also one of the
no need to
last
throw
times.
shade.
Yeah, this is also one of the last times before the draft that we get to see all these guys, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're gonna have pro days and stuff like that, but that definitely has a different feel to events like this and the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl and et cetera. So this is the last time that evaluators really get to see these guys on the field doing important work. So we're gonna go through a few topics here. We're gonna talk about some of the biggest storylines, stuff like that. We're going to start off with the wide receivers and cornerbacks. We talked about this last week in our last episode of the positional rankings. There are a lot of guys that have question marks when it comes to speed, and especially the speed. So we're going to start off 40-yard dash. The crown jewel of the NFL Combine. Everybody loves watching this. It says a lot about a lot of prospects. Those two positions. Let's start with wide receiver. Who are you looking at specifically in this that can potentially separate themselves or potentially hurt themselves if they don't run a fast time?
I want to look at, I know you're going to talk about them too, but the two at wide receiver, the two guys out of Texas,
Yep.
Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond. This is going to be a big drill for those two, Golden especially. I mean, we have the idea, and we talked about it in our wide receiver show, that he's not going to quite be Xavier Worthy fast, but he's going to be one of the fastest guys in this class, and that kind of speed can bump him into a potential first round category where we had him going, as high to the Dallas Cowboys, I believe it was, in our first mock draft. So those two guys are important, and the other one I'm looking at on my board is Trey Harris, because again, I talked about not having elite traits on the tape, but this week can change a lot of things for him and his projection as well. I mean, you can see him late first round, or you can see him third round, depending on how this week goes.
Yeah. I think at the top of this board, there's actually a lot of players that are in kind of that ideal height range for wide receiver. I mean, you're looking at the baseline 50th percentile around 6'1", around that weight. And you've got guys, Tet McMillan, 6'5", Jaden Higgins, 6'4", Trey Harris, 6'3", Jack Besh, 6'2", Amika Ibuka in that 6 foot range. So there's a lot of these guys, and we talked about this last week. I believe you had Trey Harris at 6 and or 5, and I had Trey Harris at 3. He's a guy that we talked about doesn't really or hasn't shown that he has a bunch of elite traits, but he also does everything else really good. So it's going to be interesting to see, especially in an event like the combine, is he able to get a 50th percentile or higher 40? Does he break that 6'5" mark? Because if he breaks that 6'5" mark, he's almost guaranteed to go in the first round if he does that. Or, sorry, not 6'5", 4'5" mark in the 40-yard
Yeah.
dash. He's almost guaranteed to go in the first round at that point based on the skill set that's shown. So there's a lot on the line for a lot of these guys. Tet McMillan at 6'5", he runs a good 40-yard dash. I mean, probably below 4.55, 4.6, if I had to guess. I mean, he's pretty much locked into a top 10 pick potentially with some of those teams that are wide receiver needy. But some other guys that I'm looking at um, in this event, Alec Iomenor, he is
Yeah.
very physical wide receiver that was a little bit inconsistent this past year. But I mean, the tape that stood out to me is when he pretty much dominated Travis Hunter um, in one game this past season. I believe it was 2024. And speed is going to be a question mark for him. He's another guy that's at around 6'1, 6'2. So it'll be interesting to see if he can get out there, run a good 40, ace some of these other events at the combine as well. He could be a guy that's in that early day two conversation.
Yeah, and so is Jaden Higgins out of
Yep.
Iowa State. I mean, a guy that's 6'4", potentially could weigh in the range of 215 based on what his playing weight was, and if he can get above that number, this guy looks so fluid. And I'm not necessarily looking at the 40-yard dash, per se for Jaden Higgins, but more of like the gauntlet drills,
Yep.
like seeing this guy work and move and then get to the football, and then his athleticism and fluidity after going around the field that's going to, open a lot of eyes to a guy like that. And, I think we mentioned him as another guy that could be potential late first round, like we saw last year, where teams start trading in to the 28 to 32 range to try to peel some of these wide receivers off the board before day two.
Yeah, I was gonna say when the from this past week, what I've been hearing, Jaden Higgins, Trey Harris, Matthew Golden, those kind of guys are kind of in that conversation to potentially be that last wide receiver in the first round. I mean, Trey Harris, one thing that I love about him, you were just talking about it, his play speed is great. I love the way he moves in pads, love his fluidity, stuff like that. Is he able to show off there? Jaden Higgins, can he do that? Matthew Golden, does he run below a 4.35? Right? Like what these little things are going to determine whether, you're a day two pick or you're a late day one pick. So a lot on the line for some of these guys at the position this week.
Yeah, and getting that fifth year option as a first round pick
Yep.
for wide receivers is key, especially with the market continuing to rise as quick as it is in the league. So we're going to see, especially like these names we're mentioning, who's going to separate themselves and be able to prove to a team that they can be a first round guy and be able to lock up for a team for the next 5 years on a rookie contract is going to be key to see. And it starts this week.
All right. And one more thing that we'll throw out here. Question for you.
Yeah.
If Arian Smith runs an absolutely insane 40-yard dash, how many people forget that he completely doesn't know how to catch a football and gets drafted early day two?
I mean, do you
What
remember
time does he
Justin?
need to run?
Do you remember Justin Ross? Because it paid off for him. We'll see. I mean, speed is this guy's calling card, and
Yep.
his claim to fame, and the rest of it isn't. So they're projecting 4.25 for him, and we'll see if he gets even quicker than that. But yeah, Arian Smith from Georgia could turn some heads with that 40-yard dash, and I I wouldn't be banking my stock on that drill for him.
Make sure to keep an eye on Georgia's Arian Smith at the 40-yard dash this week. All right, so let's move on. Pretty much same topic of conversation here, but for the cornerbacks. This is
Yeah.
a position that, there's a lot of question marks at in terms of health, in terms of ability to play in man to man versus zone. And it also has arguably the most fascinating player in all of college football, Travis Hunter here,
Mhm.
going, trying to prove himself as a corner. A lot of people question that. Who are you looking at this position? And then we'll move on. We'll talk about Travis Hunter a little bit more in depth after this. But who else outside of that are you looking at measurement wise, 40-yard dash time? What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm gonna throw a name out there at corner we didn't talk about in our cornerback rankings, but Darian Porter, a guy with a 6'4" frame. If the shuttle and 40 time pay off for him, this blend of size and speed for him can make an a really enticing prospect at the cornerback position. And the same with Will Johnson. We know Will Johnson's going to be a top 10 pick. And it really depends if he gets in the top five, if he can prove his top end speed with the 40-yard dash. That's going to change a lot of things. One of the big question marks I had after watching his tape.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of I was actually looking at this a little bit earlier. There's actually really good in terms of height. There's a lot of really good size at the top half of this board. I mean, Darian Porter, you talked about Will Johnson, Travis Hunter, Benjamin Morrison, Shavon Ravel, all above the 75th percentile in terms of height. Azariah Thomas as well. and Trey Amos. All of those guys above the 75th percentile. So, the question is, what's going to separate them? And I think at the end of the day, that's going to be the 40-yard dash, right? Uh, are you able to keep up with these very quick wide receivers in the NFL? Will you be able to go in man-to-man coverage on an island? That's what the 40-yard dash shows in a lot of these things. Weight is another thing that we're going to have to talk about. Travis Hunter, a lot of people are concerned about that, especially going up against more physical wide receivers. I know some Senior Bowl and Shrine Bowl standouts, Kobe Bryant and Quincy Riley, have some weight concerns as well. So there's a lot of question marks with the position. There's no doubt that there's a lot of talent, but this week is going to determine whether Will Johnson is a top 10 pick or if he drops into the mid teens. Benjamin Morrison, you're going to have to go into some of those interviews, talk about your health. How does the health come back? Can you still run as fast as you can? What does the hips look like in those on field drills? But this is going to be a big week for the top half of this board because we could see potentially only 2 corners go in the first round if people don't test as well as they should.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting for that position group this week.
Yeah, and Benjamin Morrison with the hip thing, that was a great point that you brought up because he fell quick on our first round mock draft. He still got in the first round, but we're just looking at other positions and considering them. And you think about the injury history and everything like that. That's questions you answer this week. And like we said, it carries a lot of weight. If he looks good and if the injuries check out and everything is good in the interviews, then he's back in that category as one of the top 2, top 3 players of this position.
And you're looking at Benjamin Morrison and Chavone Rebel here for that.
Yeah.
Both had severe injuries, cut their season short. And they're 2 guys that could potentially be top 3 corners in this class. So a lot to look forward to there. So let's talk Travis Hunter real quick. We're going to move on. Him specifically, he's got a lot to prove this week, apparently. Obviously he's going to be a top 5 corner, a top 5 pick in this draft. I don't think there's any question about that. But what position is he going to play in the NFL? Will he be able to play both ways? Seems like everybody's confident that he'll be able to play receiver, but he goes into the combine as a corner. What do you need to see out of him if you're a decision maker in the NFL? What do you need to see out of him this week to say, okay, we're confident in him being a number 1, number 2 corner and playing full time in that position?
Yeah, the hips is a big thing. I'm not worried about the speed. The speed is what it is at either position, but you need to know, can this guy turn? Can this, how fluid is this guy's hips? How fluid is this guy's footwork? Because it's a different animal, trying to play that position at the next level and being able to stick with wide receivers than just being a wide receiver, in and of itself. And no player this week is going to have more cameras on him than Travis Hunter. No player is going to have more reporters at their stand at the interview process than Travis Hunter. He is the belle of the ball of all the prospects this year, and everything he does is going to be on display this week.
So now moving on to his weight. That's had a lot of question marks. I honestly have not done the research to see what an updated weight is, but according to ESPN, he's weighed in at 185 pounds, which would be underneath the 25th percentile for a cornerback based on the baseline. Do you think he needs to bulk up in order to be a full-time full-time corner? Or do you think his tape in college has shown that he'll be able to do it no matter what? And, you don't need to really worry about that.
I don't think I necessarily have to worry about it. I think he's already proved enough on the field, what he was able to do, just being a lockdown corner. And also, like, kind of the size thing is that you're kind of projecting someone that's going to be a every down player. And I think he's going to get a lot of snaps both ways, but I don't know if he either way is going to be an every down player because they're going to be using him in a lot of different ways. Like, he's not going to be your every snap number 1 lockdown corner. He's going to have packages on both sides that just get him on the ball or get him on the field and attack the ball at both positions and try to just, come in different packages. I don't know necessarily that the weight's going to be an issue for him.
And I mean, also when you're looking at the teams that could potentially draft him, 3 of them, I'd say the Patriots, the Browns, and the Jaguars, he might not necessarily have to go out there and be cornerback 1.
Yeah.
Even the Giants, you could potentially throw in there depending on who you get. But he's going to be cornerback 2, most likely in that system. So it's not that big of a deal. But it'll be interesting to see how he performs because it seems like he just wants to prove to everybody that he can be a lockdown and number one corner in this league. All right, let's move on to the quarterbacks. Now, everybody seems to be pretty set on Cam Ward and Shador Sanders as quarterback 1 and 2 for the most part. But from quarterback 3 down, there are a lot of question marks. It's all over the place. Is Jackson Dart quarterback 3? Will Howard? I mean, Tyler Shuck is getting shouts at quarterback 3. So is Kyle McCord. There's a lot of question marks. Everybody's throwing Quinn Ewer's name out there. Like all of a sudden, he has a good week. He could move from quarterback 10 to quarterback into the top 5 quarterbacks. So interviews, obviously important. Who's standing out to you at this position? What do they need to do in order to kind of boost their draft stock this week?
Yeah, I've just been notably negative on him every time we've talked about him. This is a massive, massive week for Jalen Milroe. This is your last chance to get it all together. No one's going to care what you do at your Alabama Pro Day because they're going to have that so structured to make you look good. This is your last chance. You're the most physically gifted quarterback in this class. Can you throw the ball? Can you hit your receiver on a route? And, if he posts like an insane eye-popping 40-yard dash time with his size, that helps his chances out a lot, especially with how his quarterback position is this year. Once you fall off the top two guys, he has the most at stake, I think, at this position. Because, like I said, this is his last chance to prove to a scout that he's worth drafting in this year's class.
Yeah. I mean, Jalen Milroe's biggest thing over the past, few months, few seasons is, consistency in the passing game. We know he's going to go and run a good 40-yard dash. Can he elevate that and run an elite 40-yard dash for a quarterback? And then when it comes to the position drills, this is the perfect time for him to prove that he can hang with the other players in this class because you are going with wide receivers that you've never played with before. So you need to adjust to timing really quickly. You need to get familiar with them. And if you can do that, you can prove to teams that you can develop and you can get it done. I'm looking at Tyler Shuck. I'm looking at Kyle McCord as two players that should thrive. Even Will Howard that should thrive in the on-field drills, just based on what I've seen. 40-yard dash, I think, is going to be a little bit more important for them just to prove that they can move around at, a decent level. But Jalen Milroe, he's going to have to prove something pretty quickly if he wants to kind of jump up boards and solidify himself as a day 2 pick. Because right now he's probably an early day 3 pick for me at this point. But what about Quinn Ewers? Been hearing a lot about him over the past week or two. A lot of people are a little concerned with his arm strength, with his injury history. Are the interviews going to be the most important part for him, or does he need to show something on the field still in order to kind of move up draft boards?
Yeah, I think the interview is the big part because this guy's always been under a lot of pressure at Texas, with all the Arch Manning situations going on, him being hurt and back on the field. They said he's put on some weight. I think that's going to be good for him. We'll see what that number comes in officially, but I'm not necessarily looking for anything, throwing wise or physically on the field from Quinn Ewers this week. More so is his mentality and answering some of the hard questions that's definitely going to be coming his way.
Yeah. I think the interviews for a lot of these guys, I mean, especially for Cam Ward, Shador Sanders, Jackson Dart, the interviews are going to be key for them because that's what's going to determine the order come draft day at this point. I mean, Cam Ward seems like he's the surefire quarterback 1. Shador Sanders, is he going to be a top 5 pick? I don't know. We'll see. I think the interviews are going to have a lot to say about that. And then Jackson Dart, is he a first round pick? I think that's the big thing. Is he going to go to the Jets at 7? Is he going to go to the Steelers at 21? Or is he going to fall out of the first round? He's proven that he's got the athletic ability. Now you got to be able to, take all those question marks and answer them in interviews. So it'll be interesting to see, but there could be a lot of movement in the quarterback room this coming week.
Yeah, I'm excited about Jackson Dart. Just want to throw that out there. I mean,
Yeah.
this is kind of like what we saw at Bo Nix last year. There were so many questions. No one was really high on him. Everyone was high on him. Everyone was low on him. Like it was so wishy-washy anytime reports came out about Bo Nix and how he looked. And, on the field in his college career, it looked underwhelming. You didn't know what kind of guys to turn into. And as a rookie, Bo Nix leads, the Denver Broncos into the playoffs. So Jackson Dart is, that kind of style. I mean, or just, the style of the process going into it. He, had a very underwhelming, underappreciated college career. And if he comes out and lights up the board this week, now you're starting to talk about him as being, a solidified QB3 in this class.
Now that you bring up Bo Nix, this is actually a good segue into the last two quarterbacks that I want to bring up real quick. Dylan Gabriel, Tyler Shuck. Two guys that, their biggest asset right now is their experience. And we've seen that experience has carried a lot of these guys into the NFL and has, catapulted them into starting roles and relevance. We're going to talk about our quarterbacks in a few episodes a little bit more deeply, but for those two guys specifically, is their experience enough? Or, where do you have them currently compared to some of these other quarterbacks right now? And what do they have to do?
Yeah, I mean, Tyler Shuck is getting a lot of hype right now. I don't know where it's coming from, but I've seen his name more this week than I have the
It's
entire
the crazy
process.
arm angles. I'll tell you that. It's the crazy arm angles that he throws from.
Yeah, well, that's gonna definitely help him out if he can show off some of that some more. But I mean, Senior Bowl, he looked good. He was slinging it out there, but it's neither one of them I thought really, had my name or had their names on my radar. But we'll see what they can do. I mean, Tyler Shook seems to be the guy right now getting a lot of buzz compared to Dylan Gabriel, though. I will mention that.
I think for me personally, when I look at Tyler Shuck, not a bad quarterback in any sense, but I think he is, benefiting from subpar quarterback play at these events. I mean, we haven't really seen anybody stand out per se. Jackson Dart didn't have his best performance at the Senior Bowl. Obviously, Cam and Shador both didn't play at either of the All Star events. And then everybody else was kind of just, subpar. And, he's going out there and he's making plays. Maybe he ends up being a top five quarterback in this class and he ends up being a, impact player at the next level. But I think a lot of people are kind of seeing this as him outshining these other guys. And that's kind of putting a little haze in front of the eyes. But we'll see. It'll be an interesting to watch them in the drills this week and see if anything comes out of it. But let's move on to the offensive line and the defensive line. We've talked a lot about arm length for the offensive line. We've talked about how deep the interior and the edge rushers are on the defensive line. Let's start with the offensive line. Talked a lot about measurements. Measurements are going to be key for this group. We've already seen Gray Zabel, Mark Zembo. A lot of these guys moved to the interior already, per se. Obviously, they could still kick outside once they get to the NFL, but they're going for interior. We're going to look at guys like Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks in terms of arm length. We're going to be looking at Ariante Ersuri and Armin Membu in terms of height. What do we need to see out of these guys in order to solidify themselves as offensive tackles? Because if they don't, we're going to see some guys like Josh Simmons skyrocket up boards so that teams can try to get a franchise
So,
offensive
yeah.
tackle.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned that maybe about Josh Simmons. I do think that once they get closer, you're going to see him start creeping up into the top 20 range because of what you were just saying. Teams looking for a solidified offensive tackle aren't going to be playing games with these guys that are the tweeners because of arm length. I mean, even Armand Imbu a little bit, potentially already getting, mocked as moving over to right guard from right tackle. But him, Kelvin Banks, Will Campbell. Personally, I'm not a big stickler for it because we've seen tackles with short arms be able to play at Pro Bowl levels before. So I'm not as big of a stickler about it, especially with like the top two, Kelvin Banks and Will Campbell, because they project really well at either position. And I have no problem. It's just a team preference, in my opinion. Where's your biggest need on your roster? Do you need a left tackle or do you need a left guard? And that's kind of what it's going to come down to. But Donovan Jackson as well. He's played at guard in the past and played offensive tackle in the past. We'll see what position he wants to go with, and which one he looks, more like a better fit in it.
So yeah, arm length is obviously going to be key, and I mean it's been the talk of the draft for the entire time. Now, one thing that I'm just kind of becoming aware of over the past few weeks is the height of some of these guys, like Arianta Arasuri and Armin Membu. They're both in the 0 percentile for height at the offensive tackle position at 6'3". Obviously it hasn't stopped them from being extremely successful in college, but do you think that's going to affect their draft stock here? Because Armin Membu, we're projecting as potentially a top 15 pick here, in the draft. I mean, I don't know if he actually made it into our top 15 in ours, but I know he's in the conversation in some of those 10 to 15 range uh in a lot of mock drafts. So it'll be interesting to see. But how much do you think that's going to affect their draft stock?
Just in terms of like their height.
Height, yeah. I mean, because
Yeah,
the
height.
thing is, Armin, the last measurement I saw is 34 arms, which is like 75th percentile around. So that shouldn't
Yeah,
be an issue. But 6'3", it's well below what you're looking for as a NFL starting
offensive tackle.
lineman.
Yeah. I mean, it could play a big part of it. We'll see. And again, that's a preference thing.
Yep.
Some people will preference bigger, bulkier tackles, and the guards, or excuse me, the Eagles moving Mekhi Becton to guard and wanting him to play guard because of how big he is, and they preferred having a big guard. It's just all team preference. Ultimately, that's what it is. He's not going to drop out of the first round just because he's shorter than we expected, in my opinion. But it could throw Miami Dolphins off the radar, or one of the teams off his radar just because he comes in a little shorter than expected. Yeah, I mean, it just teams are different in how they evaluate players. So personally, I don't think it's going to make a huge impact. Just in terms of what team will look one way versus looking the other way with certain prospects.
I think for me, the most interesting part is going to be how many players change positions because of the measurements that they have at this combine. I mean, we're looking
Yeah.
at Campbell and Kelvin Banks as the top two potentially offensive tackles when it comes to skill and tape. I wouldn't be surprised if these guys, even if they don't move to guard, they end up being right tackles in the NFL because of what we're seeing here. But that for me, it just pushes Josh Simmons up the board. I really
Yeah.
like Josh Simmons. I think he cleaned up the penalties earlier this year. If he didn't get injured, we might be talking about him as a potential top 5 pick in this class. I mean, he's got the height, he's got the build, he's got the skill. So I'm interested to see how that all plays out because I'm really high on Josh Simmons. I think Kelvin and Will Campbell should still go in the top 12 picks, but
Mhm.
you could definitely see Josh Simmons squeak into that top 15 if everything goes as we're expecting it to go.
Yeah, I think he's going to have a big rise just because of that. And outside the first round, I'm looking at some of the smaller school guys.
Yep.
I love the small school guys shining at the combine. So some of the guys that are on my list, like Charles Grant, Jackson Slater, Clay Webb, Caleb Rogers, those guys, how are they going to, show themselves out this week? I'm excited for the interviews because I love the mentality some of these young or some of these smaller school guys have, especially with offensive linemen. Having a small school offensive lineman that's got a chip on their shoulder that wants to come out and prove themselves, and Gray Zabel as well. How are they going to come out and prove themselves this week will be big for the potential day two selections.
I think for a lot of these guys, the shuttle is going to be a huge factor.
Yes,
I mean,
the shuttle was very huge.
if you get under a 4.5, I mean that will raise your draft stock tremendously. I mean, no matter what position on the offensive line you are, if you get under a 4.5, I mean, you're locking yourself into a day 2 or better pick, whatever it is. So really interesting there. Let's quickly move on to the defensive line. We've talked about this a lot. For me, this is all athletic traits. That's what we're going to be looking at. Shamar Stewart is going to be huge here. We're going to see Abdul Carter potentially absolutely dominate. Mike Green, who are you excited to see at this position? Because, I mean, there's going to be some explosive plays here, and some of those RAS scores are going to be insane.
Yeah, I think it's make or break for Jalen Walker. I
Yep.
think he might have the biggest or the highest RAS score out of this entire group. This guy is an athletic freak. And it's going to be, his overall measurements are going to be big for him because people have said he's going to be off-ball linebacker. Can he actually be, an on the line of scrimmage edge rusher? That's going to be big for him. But his 40-yard dash, his vertical jump, his broad jump, all those are I expect to be absolutely off the charts. I mean, he's a freak and he's from Georgia. At the combine, we know those Georgia Bulldogs absolutely rule this event on the defensive line. So I mean, this is Jalen Walker's chance to prove himself that he could potentially be a top 10 pick.
Yeah. Another guy just that you mentioned, off ball linebacker, edge, not an edge right now, going in as an off ball linebacker, Jihad Campbell. Another guy that
Yeah,
will be
yeah,
interesting to see what he does at the combine because he started off at Bama as an edge rusher. He moved to off ball linebacker, but watching the tape, he's got great instincts and a great pass rush. So he's a guy that if he pops at the combine, you never know. Once he gets to the NFL, he could transition back into an edge rusher and be an absolute problem there. So that's another guy that you should be looking at. Now, deep interior defensive line, most interior defensive linemen we've ever seen at the combine. This is the time where we're going to be able to separate some of these top guys that we talked about a few episodes ago.
yeah.
Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon, who is that second guy behind Mason Graham. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of separation between a lot of these guys. I mean, we could see what, 5, maybe even 6 guys go in the first round at this position if people have like big time combine weeks. I mean, it's a talented group. It's just there's a lot of question marks behind them. Where Mason Graham, he's top 5 player in this draft, no questions asked. Everybody else, they've got some question marks. So it'll be interesting to see if anybody gets those answered come this week.
Yeah, and like the guys like Walter Nolan, you're talking about Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon. I'm even going to throw Talik Williams in there. They're wanting to put themselves above the others,
Yep.
if that makes sense. Because we know Mason Graham is the top guy. So who's going to be the first one after that? And Walter Nolan has a chance to, but I think his interviews are going to be key too. Because there's some off the field concerns people are bringing up now about him in his past. So he's going to have to answer for some of those, on the stand, if you will, in front of some of the reporters that are going to ask some of those tough questions to him. And that feedback that he gives them at the interviews this week at the combine is going to be key if he wants to be the number 2 defensive tackle to come off the board.
Yep. All right. So that's a great transition. We got about 6.5 minutes left here. Before we move into our last 2 position groups that we want to look at, you bring up off-field issues. James Pierce has been a big name that's been thrown around
Yeah.
the past of a couple weeks. He's a guy that, a lot of people have him as a potential top 10 pick in this class. Off-field issues, he wasn't in DJ's last first round mock draft. So
I don't get
how
it.
big is this week for James Pierce? Because he's going to show out on the field. He's maybe the most athletic player at the edge rusher position this year. He's in that conversation. But these off-field issues, it's not looking good. Him, Mike Green, and I forget who the third one was that was in conversations this week, but interviews are going to be huge for those guys.
Yeah, and it's crazy. It's not like they have like prior issues they got to answer for or anything like that. It's just terms of mentality. Are you mentally, do you have the mentality of wanting to be the best? And that's kind of the questions that are going to have to work with their agents and, try to get those answers ironed out to see, what do we need to say to prove this to some of the scouts in attendance and the general managers watching. And that's crazy. Like the James Pierce thing, they're talking about his drive and his desire to be great, and they're going to push the guy out of, and the top of the board. Like you said, DJ didn't even have him in the first round mock draft, top 32 selections because of his drive. The drive's there. Watch the tape. I mean, this guy's incredible, and he's productive and has been, and he's coming from a great organization or a great program, excuse me, in Tennessee. Yeah, I mean, I hope he gets all that cleared up because that's absolutely ridiculous and
There's
trying to
been
knock a
crazier
player
things that have
because of that.
happened. Yeah, there's
Yeah,
been crazier things that have
definitely.
happened, but he should no question be a first round draft pick. Now,
Um, I do
yep,
want to say one last D tackle. I always want to bring him up. Deion
okay,
Walker.
yep,
What
yep.
he can do just because Javondre Sweat did not have a good combine last year, but still was a second round pick. But they were talking about him being a late first rounder, and it showed on his size. You're like, okay, this guy looked unathletic, but Tennessee still took the risk on him in the second round, and he had off the field issues. So Deion Walker,
He's been good. All
just for him, yeah, so far just for him, he's been good. Let's see, hopefully the size doesn't have a negative impact for him this week.
right, so let's quickly just some other storylines here. Tight ends and running backs, 2 of the deeper groups in this draft class. What are you looking at these positions? For me personally, I mean, running backs, speed. That's going to be
Yeah,
key because there's just so many players. I mean, 30, 40 draftable grades at running back this year. Like, it's ridiculous. I think when you break it down, each team's obviously going to have their own preferences. It's about how you stack the board at this point. So I think 40-yard dash is going to be key. Interviews are going to be key. So we're going to see what happens there. And then with the tight end position, athleticism. Is Colson Loveland, does he jump over Tyler Warren as tight end one, as I've seen some people say? Does Gunnar Helm, Harold Fannin Jr., those kind of guys break into that top 5 tight end conversation? Elijah Arroyo, who's an athletic beast, does he show out and does he kind of prove that, he's got the actual playing ability to, thrive in the NFL? So that's kind of what I'm seeing. Guys, there's going to be a lot of, in my opinion, there's going to be a lot of flip-flopping of players in these two positions. It should be an exciting week to watch for these guys.
Yeah, I think this is another big separator position, the tight end one, because we know the top two guys, and it's just again preference of one of the two. There's stuff that Tyler Warren does really, really good, and there's stuff that different stuff that Colson Loveland does really, really good, and he's a way better receiver, but as an overall tight end and do it all player, Tyler Warren's your guy.
Yep.
So there's not really any separation, I think, between those two. It's just what a team needs for their offense. But the Harold Fannins, the Gunnar Helms, this is going to be a big week for those guys. At running back, I'm looking at the two Ohio State ones. Between Travion and then Quinshawn. Those two are seem like neck and neck. And you see mock drafts, it's like one of the Ohio State running backs. It's okay. Well, which one do you want? So they're both neck and neck, and because they split so much time together out of that backfield this year, one of those two is going to separate themselves.
I love Travion Henderson personally. I've loved him since he first started. Extremely explosive. One other guy before we wrap this up, Cam Scatabo, guy that dominated in college, physical. What is he going to run in the 40-yard dash? If he runs a good time, he's an early day 2 pick. I don't think there's any question about it. He could catapult himself into that top 5 running back conversation.
Definitely.
But, definitely early day 3, late day 2 at the worst. So that concludes the preview. This is going to be out just before the combine, probably around 11 a.m. So it'll be out before. Make sure to watch. And we'll do a recap on next Monday of it. But in between, we will go safeties, tight ends, and linebackers, our top 5s in each of those positions. We talked about some of them today. By Thursday, when we release that, it'll be interesting to see if any of our opinions change on some of those guys. But, it should be an exciting week.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I'm excited for the recap because there's
Yeah.
going to be players we didn't talk about today that by the end of the week are going to be household names because of what they do this week.
Yep.
So big week for a lot of prospects in attendance.
All right. Well, Cole, I will see you on Thursday. We'll discuss the combine a little bit while we're doing that, but the main recap will be next Monday. So see you guys then.